right, welcome to the BS Your Way Through Live show. Super happy to have you all here. We have a very awesome guest today. Today I'm joined by Julian Bermudez. I hope I said your name. Who helps people transform suffering into self-trust and inner liberation. Let's dive into breaking free from old patterns and stepping into personal power. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. How do you say your last name? Is it Bermudez? Did I say that right? Or is it Bermudez?
Depends on where you're at. Everybody says it differently, so that's
Okay,
a-okay.
we'll go with it. Okay, first of all, we all want to know how you came to do what you do. So, what is it you do, and how did you come to do what you did do?
Sure. So I help people work with the pain from the past or work through trauma. And the way that I came to really understanding how to do this and ultimately helping other people was working through my own pain and trying to cultivate some agency, some choice, some responsibility for the way that I feel, the way that I perceive things, the way that I behave, and ultimately trying to liberate myself from the old patterns that were handed down to me. So, um, who I am in a nutshell is I was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1987 to very young parents who were not friendly with each other whatsoever. They didn't like each other. And to make things more complicated,
Not a
they
good
were,
childhood.
yeah. So they were, well, I'm sorry. What was that last part?
I said that's not a good setup for a childhood.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. Right. Well, to make things more complicated, they were of very different ethnicities and socioeconomic statuses as well in a highly segregated and racial area.
Oh, wow.
So, needless to say, they didn't want me. And
Mm.
as they bounced me back and forth through my life, as I would model one parent or one family, the other family would hate me for it. And as I modeled this one, then the other family hated for me.
Oh no, that's not
Yeah.
fair.
Well, that's the world that I was born into. And so the trauma wasn't what happened to me, but it was what happened inside of me as a result to what happened. So the way that I perceived the world was it was very dangerous. It was never safe. I was never welcome. I was never wanted. And anything that I would do would all ultimately result in some sort of judgment, criticism, or punishment. So no matter what I could do, it was never going to be good enough. And the type of person that can never do something that would get them accepted or could never be accepted is somebody who's not lovable. So that was the belief that I had internalized was I was defective, I was damaged, I was not good enough, I was not lovable, I was not worthy of love. And all of this pain kind of built layers of adaptations on top of it. And I found myself at a place where I just wasn't able to continue anymore. My life was at a juncture where it was either going to end, or I was going to end in prison, or I was going to have to make changes. And that was the junction of my early 20s. And so I went down this path of academia and studies trying to learn therapy techniques. And being dissatisfied with the way the university was handling addictions and therapy, I found some really interesting teachers out there through my own self-study. And one thing led to the next, and I learned this incredible way of relating to yourself and connecting to yourself and reflecting internally and ultimately transforming the internal state into something more consciously. And that's what led me to where I am today.
That's beautiful. It's amazing how the tragedies or trauma that we go through, that if, when we finally find our way, so to speak, or whatever, is through our tragedies and trauma, we can help uplift others. We don't have to let that be like, okay, I've gone through all this, but now I can help somebody else get through this. So I'm sure that's one of your driven reasons why you do what you do today, because you have the experience and the tools to be able to help people overcome, what you personally had to overcome. And that's better than any like professor or anything, is
Sure.
the person with experience. So
Yeah, that
thank
was a big
you.
reason why I got into it was I wanted to help. the people that I really needed to be important to when I was younger. Because, what kind of person does that to their child? Well,
Yeah,
it's somebody who's in terrible pain themselves.
it's
And
true. Yeah,
so, one of the main motivations behind learning these techniques was to help others. But the only way that you can help others is through helping yourself.
it's
Um,
true.
it's like the Buddhist philosophy that it's because you suffer and it's because I suffer that we can understand one another.
Exactly.
So this suffering becomes a common language that I'm able to use to really connect with people and help them reconnect with themselves.
That's beautiful. Okay, so um what's the difference between hold on, that's not the question one. I'm sorry. What does because like you talked about finding it here. There's a particular so you talked to because you talk about in your email that you sent me, you talk about cultivate like agency basically. So what does agency really mean in everyday life and how can people reclaim it in small ways? So
Hmm.
what exactly do you how does that fit into your practice?
Yeah. So in my personal example, I was never good enough. And
Right.
when you're not good enough, when you have this pain, there's only a few ways that you can deal with it. So, for a kid, for instance, when you're going through a similar situation as I am, when things are dangerous, when you're in terrible pain, when your needs are not met, your environment's unstable, you're being neglected, you're being hurt, so on and so forth, there's only a couple ways that you can really make sense of the environment. The first way is you can say, my parents, my caregivers, my family, whoever, they're just not up to the job. They're not capable, they're not qualified, they're not prepared to be parents, they're not able to be parents. They cannot meet my needs. In other words, I'm not safe. And that has a bit of a dead end negative outlook. So there's not much outcome that can happen by looking at the world that way. So the way that most children will come to make sense of their environment is the second option, which is my parents, my caregivers, my family, my teacher, they do know what's going on. They're older, they have relationships, they can interact and care for each other. The problem is, I'm not able to get that from them. So that means there's
Right.
something wrong with me. So if I could be good enough, if I could do the things that they want me to do, if I could make them happy, if I could take care of them, if I could please them, if I could be smaller, if I could be bigger, whatever it is, then I will get the care that I want. So this is an early choice that we make, but it's unconscious. We're not
Yeah.
aware of it. It's just
Yeah.
it's actually a survival adaptation to the trauma that we're dealing with. And so for the rest of our lives, we might find ourselves on a type of autopilot where we're constantly trying to be good enough in certain ways. We become people pleasers. We sacrifice ourselves to make other people happy, despite the fact that it hurts us. We try to accumulate status, power, positions of respect, money, authority, all in the name of trying to be good enough. So when we see people who are very highly successful or doctors, for instance, and I know a lot of them, and you ask them, why did you get into this? They'll tell you, I wanted to help people. I wanted to be altruistic. I want so on and so forth. But when
Right.
I really get to know them and when they come to see me as clients, what we see is all of this is an adaptation to that very early pain. So it's an unconscious pattern that people are following. There's no choice involved in this. So the question of how do we cultivate agency is how can we bring choice into that equation, right? And the way that we can do that is by building awareness first and foremost. So we want to start to recognize what are we feeling? What are we perceiving or thinking about the environment? And what are we perceiving about ourselves? What is the core belief about ourselves?
Right.
So, what are my emotions? Am I angry? Am I sad? Am I scared? Am I ashamed? So on. And what do I do with those emotions? Do I push them away? Do I disconnect from them? And what is the belief about myself? Am I not worthy of having emotions? Because when
Right.
I was a kid, if I expressed my emotions, bad things
How
happen.
dare you?
Exactly. So the whole thing is first thing building awareness on these unconscious patterns that are controlling and directing our lives. And then figuring out how can we start to cultivate the ability to take responsibility or the ability to respond differently in those situations. And once we can start to introduce choices, this is the cultivation of agency.
Wow, that's beautiful. You know, it's interesting because like you mentioned your childhood and basically being punished for having emotions. I think because like, you know, in my in some most of our generations we're taught to suppress, you know, our emotions and whatever. And one day I had this huge realization. I was kind of doing that to my children that I was so it just hit me. I was just like, I think I'm making my children feel like their feelings are inconvenient. And so I immediately like went out and said, "Hey guys, if any point I ever feel make you feel bad for feeling sad, angry, or disappointed or depressed at all at any point, don't take it personally. I don't ever mean that. I want you to feel whatever you have to feel, help you get through it. I'm so sorry if, or whatever." And they all, every single one of them were like, "Yeah, you do make us feel like that, mom." And I was just like, "I'm so sorry." Cause like it's important. We have to feel the feelings. We have to be able to work through them. And that's how we gain emotional maturity is being able to appropriately feel them and work through them and then be able to let them go. And what are some of your tools for doing that?
Yeah, so you're mentioning some very important aspects that happen here. One is our culture, our society really suppresses
Oh
emotions,
my gosh, yeah.
right? There's no place for anger in our society,
Right.
and there's no place for fear. There's no place for grief or sadness. There's no place for any emotions whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so, if you have all these repressed emotions, or if you grow up in a family where somebody has very inappropriately expressed emotions, rage, for
Mhm.
instance, which is usually acceptable by the parents, they go to work and they get the rage of their managers and so on and so forth. It always can come down. Well,
Uh-huh.
then you get the message that if you get enough status, you get enough power, you get enough respect, then you can become the president of the United States, right? If you can become grandiose and big enough, then
Hmm.
you can do whatever you want. So it comes from all sorts of angles, and you might notice you said something that said along the lines of the awareness of this is flowing through me to my children too. This same
Yeah.
dynamic of your emotions are an inconvenience.
Yeah.
So, what happens if the parents are just stressed, right? If the parents are going to work and they're dealing with the grind and the day to day and just
Yes,
trying to
parents. I've
make,
never heard of that.
yeah, right? Just trying to pay the bills, you know?
Right? Can be rough.
Well, what's the message to the kids? Because the kids have a very small worldview and
Right.
everything's about them. And the
Yeah.
parents are the most important thing in their lives.
Yeah.
So if the parents are stressed, it must be they're stressed because of me.
Uh-huh.
That's how narcissistic children are because it's the only way that they're able to think at that point.
Yeah, that's how they process.
So it's not so much that we hurt them, but it's that hurt flows through us to them. These are intergenerational patterns of trauma that get handed through. So, if we want to start to liberate ourselves from these patterns, again, the first step is being aware of when we're doing this. And once we become aware of it, once we can recognize and identify these patterns, and of course, what do we do with our own emotions? Because children won't listen to what we say to them. They're not going to listen to, if you got two parents who smoke cigarettes and they say, don't smoke cigarettes, you're not going to hear that. You're going to do what they do.
Yeah.
We model their behavior and unconsciously these patterns get transmitted from parents to the children. So if we really want to change that cycle of suppression that gets handed down, taking accountability and responsibility for ourselves, really learning how to regulate our own emotions, how to identify them, how to process them, how to express them in healthy, constructive ways, and ultimately how to comfort and soothe them, and to maintain our connections and our attachments with each other through that process. These are very critical ways that we can start to change those patterns.
That's beautiful. Yeah, because it's so hard not to, what's the word? To take out our day on, on our children or on our spouses or on family members. It's just so hard because like life can get hard. And I think on the other side of it, for and I want to know your opinion of this, on the other side of it is like so the person who's being taken, like for instance, if one of my children, what, or if I was taking something out on one of my children because I was upset, I was just frustrated, they just happened to say the wrong thing, or they walked in the wrong moment when I was, the height of my like frustration, like them being able to be, okay, mom's having a bad day, but that doesn't make her a bad person, and giving grace for the person who's upset. You know what I mean? Or like if my children are upset and they've had a bad day and they're coming out on me, and I'm just like, okay, let's all take a deep breath. Like what do you say to that, to the person who feels like they're being like you were consistently being, quote unquote attacked when you were a child, and what would you say to your child self of how to handle that, and what how to think through it, or how to feel through it, or whatever?
Yeah. Well, children aren't born with the ability to regulate emotions,
No,
right?
really.
This is something that they develop and mature based off of the parents or the mature regulated nervous systems that are
Right,
around them. The information of processing emotions literally downloads from the parents to the child unconsciously. And it's usually through touch when the child is very young.
right.
And then it is through direct connection, observations, engagement, communication. So you said something that was very important, which is my kids came in and said the wrong thing at the wrong time. So what's the message to your kids there?
But I'm upset. I don't know.
Yeah, they did something wrong,
Yeah, that they exactly. Yeah, I guess that would be
that
make.
there's
Yeah.
something wrong with them.
I literally
So
have had to be like, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry. I'm just really upset because I got off
exactly.
a terrible phone call.
Yeah. So all throughout our days, we have to suppress our emotions. If you
Right.
work a regular job, your boss is going to say all sorts of things to you, and
Uh-huh.
you can't say a darn thing about it. We
Hmm.
get stuck in this dichotomy, this conundrum here of having to choose between two fundamental things that are essential to us being healthy human beings. The
Right.
first one is our attachments. The most important thing to the children is the connection with their parents, the
Right.
attachments. They can't survive without it. But the second thing, which is equally as important, is the need to be authentic, meaning that you can express your emotions as they are, you can express your boundaries, you can have unique human needs and expressions, and be accepted as you are for those. But in our society, we have to choose between those two at a very early age.
Yeah.
You can't survive without the attachments, so the
Mhm.
authenticity always gets sacrificed. And
Yep.
this is repeated all through our culture today.
Yep.
So for parents, this is something we want to be very, very aware of, is when we're doing this. Because when we suppress our emotions and you stuff them down, they don't go anywhere,
Right.
they live inside of you. And so, an emotion like anger, which is there for a very specific reason, it serves a survival purpose.
Yes.
It lives in the moment and it needs to be expressed in the moment. But when we stuff it down, it's like chaining up a monster in the basement and throwing
Yeah.
scraps down, and
Yeah.
it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Until it blows up.
Or exactly, or you have a pressure cooker on the stove, and every time you suppress your emotions, you turn the heat
Uh-huh.
up a little bit, and then
Not healthy.
yeah, and then your kids come in and pop because
Uh-huh. Yep.
they're the closest ones, they're the most vulnerable, they're the most susceptible to receiving all of the rage that comes out,
Right.
oftentimes in very inappropriate ways.
Yeah.
So, what we can do as parents is be very, very aware of our own emotions.
Yeah.
Be very aware if we're stuffing them down or when we're just angry. And
Yeah.
and to make it acceptable to be angry. So when the kids come in and you're angry, you can say, I'm irritable right now. I'm angry, and it's very likely that I'm going to take it out on them. And then you can say,
Hmm.
children, listen, mom's having a bad day. Uh, I had all these problems go on at work. It's not your fault. I'm
Hmm.
stressed right now. It has nothing to do with you. I just
Yeah,
want you to know that I'm angry. And this is what we can do with anger. And then you can have a healthy interaction and connection with your children, expressing how you can process and express your anger.
that's beautiful. And like, it's interesting as children, even really good unintentional parents can give their children certain trauma. Like I had amazing parents, right? But then there are some emotional things that I'm still working on today that they unintentionally, it's just like, certain like, yeah, it's not okay for that. It's not okay for that, it's just like, and I took it the wrong way as a kid, and now I have to rework it in my head today as an adult. But then there's some children like you who had parents that were not that great. They put you through a lot of trauma. So when you become an adult, how do you what are the ways that we can like work that out of us, or that we can overcome that so that we can be able to finally be freed from the little, I don't know, emotional prison that we put ourselves in?
Yeah, this intergenerational trauma is what you're describing.
Yeah, I am.
It's very sneaky, and
That's
its sole purpose is to go through the generations to the next one.
mm-hmm.
So earlier you gave the analogy of I got all these emotions, my kids walk in, they say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and they're going to get the wrath. And now
Yeah.
you just told me the exact same story with your parents. They said, don't do this, that's not right, or don't do this. It's the exact same pattern. And you
Mm-hmm.
see how easily it just goes through the generations.
Yeah.
And that's its purpose. And so, what we can really work on doing here is being very aware of those patterns, really starting to notice the things that happened in childhood that affected us, how they affected us, and how that pain shows up in the present moment. The pain from the past showing up now. This pain of trauma, it can be the very explicit big T traumas that I've explained already: negligence, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, the
Mm.
abandonment of your parents,
Oh, that's bad.
having your parents take all of their frustrations out on you, being responsible for your parents' emotions.
Yeah.
Um, it can also be what we might call small t trauma, which is where good things that are supposed to happen don't happen. So having a mature, regulated, attuned nervous system in a parent that is directly attuned to you and connected to you. So we can take for granted that parents care for their kids. Even though my parents didn't want me, I can take
Right.
for granted that there was a biological programming inside of them that made them care for me on some level.
Mm-hmm.
They did the best that they could.
Right.
Now, what happens when there's very loving parents who are present in their child's life, who are trying the best they can, and they go and talk to their doctor, or they go and talk to the psychologist or the parenting expert who says, when your baby's crying, don't hold them.
Oh, I
Let them
hate
learn to
that.
let them learn to cry it out. This is what we would call small t trauma.
Right.
See, the baby doesn't know how to process emotions.
Nope.
And so they're crying out, expressing their emotions in the only way that they can. They have an emotional circuit that is programmed to tell them you need connection with your parents.
Yeah.
And this is what they do. They cry out to get
Yeah.
that connection. So the doctors now have told their parent, the parent, to withhold the thing that the baby needs the most.
I
Remove that
know.
from them. So what happens to the baby? Well, one, they get the message, my needs don't matter. I'm not
Yeah.
important right
Yeah.
away.
Yes, baby.
And they don't ever learn how to process their emotions or regulate their emotions. They learn very early that these emotions are bad and they have to be suppressed. So trauma can get passed through the generation by very well-intentioned, caring parents. And we want to be very careful not to blame ourselves or our parents through this process, because once we get hung up in this blame, one, it'll make us victims,
Right.
and two, it takes away all of our power and our
Yeah,
agency to
it does.
reclaim the responsibility.
Yep.
So if we want to make changes, the first thing we have to do is let go of the blame. We might be very, very angry about things that
Do
happened,
a lot of forgiving.
and we can start to work on processing this,
Yeah.
reclaiming responsibility here for what we have.
That is so well said. Because yeah, I remember my mother at first, she followed what the doctor had said. They literally said that exact thing to her with her first kid, with my older sister. And she, and from her experience, I'm like, well, I'm never doing that. And I'm glad I didn't. And I'm so it's so nice to hear you validate. I'm glad I didn't do that. But she heard my older sister crying and crying, and she tried to ignore it. But then she got the impression to go check. So she got and went checked, and apparently my sister had gotten herself wrapped around in her blanket, and it was all around her neck, and she was choking. And my mother's like, oh, she's like, I'm never listening to the doctor again. And so anyway, and then from then on, she just, if a baby cried, she just took care of the baby. Like the baby's need, like you said, they don't know how to process emotions and whatever. And even when we get older, like nobody's really taught us how to process our emotions. So what are some of the tools that you use that we do process our, like you mentioned in your email, self-reflection or self-inquiry or reflection. Can we touch on that a little bit? How does that help? What's that about?
Yeah. So here you're mentioning your mother has incredible paternal instincts to care for her children,
Yes.
and the experts are telling her to suppress those.
Yes, I hate that.
hmm In other words, don't trust yourself is the message that your mother
Hmm.
got.
That's all over our society.
I'm the expert. I know what's best for you. And here it almost results in the death. I mean, quite literally, if you take a newborn baby and you keep them warm and you give them all the nutrients they need, but you don't hold them, do you know what would happen to that baby?
Oh, the baby probably wouldn't survive.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They would die,
Yeah.
literally. This is well
Yeah.
known in the literature.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was a science experiment done on three different plants. One was loved and cared for, the other one was yelled at and said it was hated and not, and then the other one was completely ignored. And which one died first?
Yeah. And plants don't have a complex nervous system that we can identify.
Exactly.
They do respond to emotions, but they don't
Mhm.
process or have the emotions that we do as far as we understand. So for this baby who is born with all of these really big emotions, they're feeling incredible panic. And that doesn't even really describe what a baby's going through with these big changes in their environment, being pulled away from their mother who they've been symbiotically developing for the last 9 months. They have all these big emotions, and the only way that they can regulate those and process those is through touch. And here, the experts have told your mother to suppress all of her instincts.
Yep.
Every emotion, every instinct, every intuition in her body that is saying, hold and love your children,
Yeah.
she has to stuff down. So now there's great shame that's involved.
Yep.
There's a distrust that develops in ourselves. So, how can we reconnect with who we were
Yeah.
before all of these adaptations and pains got put on? Well, there's lots of ways to reconnect with yourself and to start to inquire. Um, oh, how personal you want to get?
Whatever.
You want to just go through an exercise and try it?
Sure. Yeah.
If you don't want to, that's okay. I can
Yeah,
just talk
I'm
about
fine.
it too.
No, I'm cool. Yeah,
Okay.
let's do it. The
Okay.
best examples for people to learn is those real examples.
Sure. Um, when was the last time something really upset you?
Oh, let's see. I typically am a person who doesn't like, I'll get upset because my I'm going through premenopause and my hormones are up and down, but it's
Uh-huh.
it's just natural. Like really, really upset. Um, I think the most traumatic experience is we no longer speak to the family member moved away, so that's good. But a lot of trauma happened with a particular family member,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, there was a lot of anger going on, and yeah, so I
Sure.
yeah, so that
Okay.
that's the experience I can think of currently right
Okay.
now is
Well, we can dive into that one, but if you don't want to on a show, that's
Oh, I don't
okay.
care. Yeah, no, I'm not
We can
afraid
do
to.
something light too, like something that just upset you recently. It could be a
Sure.
cashier clerk, it could be a person in the bus, it could be anything like that.
Well, I got recently upset because uh my day, I had it, my days were planned out like this, but then I felt like school papers. And then my husband and I we run other businesses, and it felt like I was constantly having to stop what I was doing and do paperwork and stuff. I mean, maybe this is dumb, but I don't care. I was upset. I was just like, why can't I just say, because I couldn't say no to them. They had deadlines, they had to be done. And but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I was just like, "Argh."
Okay.
It's probably terrible, whatever. Anyway,
hmm Okay. So first thing is there were things that you wanted to do and things that you needed to do.
yeah,
And
I
then
didn't
there
get
were,
anything I wanted to do.
what was that?
I said I didn't get to do anything I wanted to do for days, and I'm just like,
hmm
it happens a lot.
Yes. And then these external outside things were forced upon you, so to speak.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay. So first question is this is where we're starting to get into the self-reflection here, which is why did that upset you?
Because I felt like I was being held back from the things that actually mattered to me.
hmm I felt like I was being held back from the things that mattered to me. What kind of person has the things that matter to them deprived from them?
Uh, I, what kind of person?
hmm
Yeah. Okay. Repeat the question one more time.
What kind of so you had things that you
Yes.
wanted that were taken
Yes.
away or deprived from you.
Yes.
What kind of person has things that are important to them taken away from them?
Well, everybody has stuff has that happen to them.
hmm it's common, yes, but
Yeah.
what kind of person has that happen to them?
The kind of person that gives up their power.
Okay, what kind of person that gives up their power, and what kind of person is that?
Me. Uh, I guess I don't know. Um, what kind of person is that? Well, it's because I guess anybody can give it up, but I personally was obviously giving it up. So the kind of person who feels like they're uh I don't know, that they don't have a choice, maybe.
Somebody without a choice, somebody who is powerless,
Yeah.
somebody who's weak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now we can see a lot of these views that are underneath why this situation upset you, which is I'm powerless,
Yeah.
I'm weak, I'm being controlled by other people.
Yeah. And nobody likes to feel that way. And it definitely brings about anger
Yeah.
feelings.
Now, here's a deeper question. Is this the first time you felt like somebody was taking something important away from you or
Hmm.
controlling you?
Nope, definitely not. I have felt
How
that a lot.
how far back in your life does that go?
Uh, Probably the farthest back that really hits is mm, probably when I the first time I was engaged. Like I had pretty chill parents. I didn't feel like I was forced any way direction, so I can't think of any specifics there. But my first engagement I ever had when I was around 20, and it was an engagement I was literally kind of manipulated into. And yeah, that was but I got out of that, thank goodness. But yeah, that was definitely a time when I felt like my power was taken away and I had no control, and it was not fun.
Yeah. So this is a pattern that goes back at least to being 20,
Yeah,
a dynamic. And I'm willing to bet that if we were to dig a little further into this, we'd find it going back much further.
I'm sure.
Because you alluded to it a minute ago when you said my parents used to control and they said it has to be this way or not that way. In
Well,
other words, yeah, it was directed in some way. And that's not to criticize
um,
or blame your parents in
no,
any
of course not.
way.
They were so amazing, but then the the something that struggling with as a kid is just like because they were trying to teach me what was right and how to be a
hmm
good moral, upstanding person, which they did a good job at. But then the way they described certain things made me have an idea of it. And then it was hard for me to shake that idea once I got to the appropriate age where it was
Mhm.
okay, or the appropriate time in my life where it was okay. And it was just like, oh, well, now I got to rethink, recalibrate here, unintentionally. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a very similar pattern. And again, this was out of the best intentions.
Yes, it
And
was.
so when you say your parents were fantastic and they were great, lovely childhood, that's true. And there's another part of the story too, which is there were pains. There were constrictions. There were things that constricted you or controlled you in certain ways that you had a very difficult time breaking from.
Yeah.
And so when this situation happened recently, where you didn't get to do the things that you wanted to do, and you had all these extra tasks that were imposed on you, and you had to sacrifice what you wanted to do to make room for something else, this brought back up that old pain from the past. And that was what upset you. That was what was coming to the surface, trying to get to your attention.
Right.
So this is what we do right here is this type of inquiry. And now what your task would be is moving forward when you get upset about something is to ask, why is this upsetting me? Not
Yes.
not what's happening.
Yeah, but why? Get to the root.
Exactly. Not my husband said this thing, or my kids said this thing, or the bus driver said this. Why did that upset me?
Yeah.
And then really dive into that feeling that comes with that anger. How long have I been feeling this? Where does this come from? What was the belief about myself that developed in this? Oh, now it's all here. And now
Yeah.
we see a very young version of you who wants her own autonomy. She wants to
Mhm.
be who she is. Yes, these parameters that your parents instilled on you were helpful to get you to fit into society. But as you've mentioned many times, our society is off the rails right now,
Right.
right? So
Right.
following those parameters were something that you wanted to break free from at some point. So now, how can we exercise some choice and responsibility for these emotions as they come up in the moment? That's the exercise moving forward.
Beautiful. So yeah, it's interesting how many people, like everybody, probably everybody, that is, if they really think back, that's where the root is coming from, is particular moments, and it usually starts from childhood.
That's
And
right.
a lot of people, they don't even have to struggle to think about where it came from. They're like, yep, I know where this came from, which is very, very, amazing that they can do that. Because some people, they just struggle. They're like, sorry, I thought I'd shut that off. My bus, my son's bus alarm came off, but he didn't go to school today, so
Mm,
scared me. So yeah, anyway, so okay, so is this, so when we're getting we start reflecting. So you'd say that number one, when you're upset, figure out, okay, where's the root cause? Where is this coming from? Because once we can figure out where it's coming from, then we can figure out how to start healing that. And what is the part of being able to like heal it? Is like meditation a good, thing, or just like, or is there other, things that we can do to be able to help us, overcome where this is coming from and how to heal it so that we are less likely to have that continuously happen, the cycle to keep going, so to speak.
mhm. So to meditate means to focus intensively on something. So in this case, what we can do is we can focus intensely on the emotions. So in our society, we repress so many emotions. And here
Ah,
we saw one that came up very quickly and easily, which is anger. It flows
uh-huh.
so fast, it flows
Yes.
so easily, quick to join us. It just comes up easily. And the real task here is to identify when these emotions come up. So a moment ago, fear came up for you, right?
Yeah.
When the phone went off.
Yes.
When a task is pushed, it's anger. So we want to get very close and comfortable with these feelings. We want to build a relationship so we can recognize or identify them when they come up. So the meditation practice would be you sit still for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, however long you can, and you do it multiple times a day. So you try and do this for 3 minutes. So if you do, or for 3 times a day. So if you do it for 5 minutes, 3 times a day, that's 15 minutes out of the day.
Yeah.
I spend way more time looking at silly things on YouTube that don't serve me in any way.
Yep.
So what I do is if I have this belief about myself that I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy or that I don't have any control or power in my life, what I do is I cultivate time to myself to make myself a priority where the only thing that I'm going to do is focus on what I'm feeling. So there is no outside external control that's going to take me away from this.
Right.
So I sit still for 5 minutes and I'm going to focus in on that feeling. So when I get angry, there's a very predictable feeling that comes up. My heartbeat might increase.
Yeah.
It might grow tighter and more constricted in my chest. My muscles get very tense. My body gets hot. These are very predictable, very familiar. And if I think about a time where I was recently upset, I can feel those. And so what I do is for 5 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour, however long you can do it, you're just going to focus in on that feeling and just really start to connect with it. Listen to it. Ask all those questions that you just said a minute ago. How often do I feel this? How frequently is it here? How long have I been feeling it for? When was the first time I can remember feeling it? What were the needs that I had when I first started feeling this? And so once we can really start to connect with it, then we start to try and soothe it and comfort it by meeting those needs. It's good and grand and fantastic to do it when I'm sitting on the mat here by myself. But what happens when my kids come in
Yeah.
and it bursts out the seams? I say, ah, there's that familiar feeling. I know this. That's anger. And now I can exercise some choices in how I'm going to express it rather than following that same pattern.
Right.
So the trick is to really start to connect with those feelings inside of us. Instead of suppressing them, avoiding them, trying to get rid of them, sending them to their room until they regulate and then they can come back and get the connection that they're dependent on.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to go out of my way to connect with them, to make these emotions a priority, to make myself a priority, so I can really understand them and have a solid relationship with them. So instead of them being this big, scary, overwhelming force that's going to turn me
Hmm.
into a monster,
Yeah.
it's a familiar friend that I'm very, very comfortable with. And I'm not going to let that friend drive the car that we're in. I'm driving the car, but I'm going
Right.
to listen to this friend on where we're going, and we're going to decide on the destination together. And that's where we start to exercise choice.
Very good. It's interesting because I was going to ask you, why is it so hard for people to like for stillness? Why is stillness so hard for people? Because like a lot of people, for me, for example, too, not just because I have children, but like just to it's almost like a chore for me to just sit there and just be still. Or it was, it's not anymore, but it was even before I had kids. Why is it so hard for some people to just like what comes into play when they have a problem just sitting still?
Yeah. Well, I really sympathize and empathize with that because when I started trying to hold my attention and focus on something and sit still, I couldn't do it at all. And when I did it for 10 seconds the first time, it was a celebration. It was huge. Now
Yeah.
I can do it for hours.
Oh yeah.
But even when I'm doing it now, as soon as an emotion comes up, as soon as the uncomfortable feelings come up, then the mind kicks in and I
Mhm.
start remembering all the things that I have to do or all the things that I'm angry about. And
Yep.
then, oh, where's my phone at? I want to distract myself.
Yep.
So when we're kids and we're going through pain and difficult situations, there's only a couple ways that we can deal with it. We
Right.
can set boundaries, right?
Hmm.
I get angry, set a boundary, say, don't treat me that way,
Yeah.
unacceptable. But in my situation, if I would have done that, things would
Oh,
have gotten way more
yeah,
dangerous for
right.
me.
No.
In your situation, your parents are saying this is the right way. You have to do it this way. And if you
Mhm.
express anger and say, no, I want it a different way, you're in conflict, right?
Uh-huh.
So we learn very early, stuff these emotions down. Don't set boundaries. Okay, so I can't set boundaries. So what do I do to make the pain go away? Well, I can go away physically. Well, as a kid, you can't just pack up and leave. You're completely dependent on the relationship with your parents, even if it's a very traumatizing and difficult emotion or difficult relationship like mine was. Um, so we can't set boundaries. We can't go away physically. So what do we do? How do we
Yeah.
adapt to these difficult situations? We go away mentally,
Yep.
right? When we can't set boundaries, we can't go away physically, we check out. We go away
Yep.
mentally. It's a survival mechanism, an adaptation that's built in to dealing with very difficult pain that we don't know how to go through. And so today, when I want to sit still and I want to focus, my mind is going all crazy like
Uh-huh.
this. As
Yep.
soon as I feel something that's uncomfortable, like anger, well, I learned this is a bad emotion when I was a kid.
Yep.
So I got to get away from it. I want to distract from it and I want to look at my phone. So sitting with that discomfort is very challenging. These are all defense mechanisms that helped us, maybe even saved us in my case, in a lot of people's cases, saved our lives very early on. It was an adaptation. It doesn't serve us anymore. So we want to be very, very conscious of all of these patterns that we have and how they pull us away from the present moment. And of course, we have to exercise and develop the capacity to sit still. 10 seconds for me was so hard, so challenging. But it's just like developing the capacity for anything. It's very difficult and challenging. And the more we do it, the more we nurture this practice, the more it develops, the more it matures.
Yeah, that's so true. Because I think part of it is we're definitely we're because we've been taught that emotions are bad, that we're afraid of feeling them. And so we want to distract ourselves because we're afraid of them. And I think we need to, for anyone who needs that permission, they need to know it's okay. Just allow yourself to feel them. Sit still, allow it to come, allow it to feel so that you can process it, work it out. Because otherwise it's just gonna keep coming back and haunting you.
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. Yeah, stillness. That's something we all need because especially with kids today too, is like there's not a lot of stillness. There's so much distraction, especially with iPhones and tablets and media everywhere. There's not a lot of a bit, and the children just get fed so much like nonsense all day on their
Yeah.
phones. You know what I mean? And
Right.
so especially children that have parents that don't have a lot of boundaries,
Yeah.
you know? And yeah, it's just good for us to just be still, figure out who we are and feel our emotions and things.
Yeah. It's very
So,
important. Very.
yeah,
And with so many forces fighting for our attention, all these distractions pulling us away, this is another area where we have to really cultivate agency over our own lives.
yeah,
Where when the kids are out at school and they're surrounded by their peers all day and they got all these distractions, we have to win them back over at the end of the day.
right.
We have to cultivate a relationship where they want to come back to us, where they
Yeah,
want to connect to us, where they want us to be their North Star that they're following, their guiding principles. They want to come back under our wing. And the only way we can do that is through agenda-free, interactive,
yeah.
person-to-person connection.
Right? Exactly. Gender free. So how does someone honestly and how does um so in your email too you talked about like I don't remember the quite phrase, but basically like gentleness, or how does someone honestly and gently work to when rebuilding self-connection? I don't know how to form the
Hmm.
question properly, but like how do you get honest with yourself and yet be gentle? Because I'm sure we're pretty harsh on ourselves. I know a lot of people that are. They're so hard on themselves. How can we rebuild a self-connection? And what does it look like to be honest with ourselves and also be gentle?
Yeah, we're very harsh on ourselves, aren't
Yeah.
we?
Oh, so
Yeah.
harsh.
I mean, just in this call, we can both find examples of where we're being very harsh to
Yes.
ourselves. I see it all the time. Despite the fact that I get compliments in so many areas, I can still be so critical and
Uh-huh.
evaluatory and
Yeah.
punitive to myself. And that's despite, hours every single day and years of really working with this. So
Yeah.
it's not something that happens immediately. But again, just trying to be aware of when we're being harsh to ourselves. And we can ask, where did I learn this from? Where did I get the message of treating myself this way? Where in my life did this message and this pattern come from? And again, the more that we can be aware of this pattern of being harsh to ourselves and critical and evaluatory and punishment and judgmental, the more that we can be aware of when we're doing that, the more that we can enact choice. We can't have any choice in this matter if we're not aware that we're even doing it.
That's true.
So, just really trying to be conscious of when we're saying, I'm stupid, I'm bad, this is dumb, I don't make any, whatever it is.
Right.
It
Words are
could,
powerful.
very powerful. And these reflect the belief that we
Yeah.
have of ourselves and the relationship that we have with ourselves. So when we start to turn our attention inward and focus on what we're feeling, just taking an inventory of what this inner state looks like. That's our relationship with ourselves.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, when I talk to somebody who has parent or who has kids, for instance, and they say, how in the world can I be gentle with myself? How can I hold these emotions that I have? How can I comfort myself when I go through this? And I say, well, if your kid came to you and said, "Mom, I'm having such a bad day at school. This person did this and said that," would you say, "Well, yeah, you're stupid and you probably did something to deserve it?" Of course not. Most parents would never say that to their kids. So why do they say it to themselves?
Right.
So what I usually ask is, well, what would you say to your kids? What would you do with your kids? And then they tell me all these wonderful ways of how they would comfort their kids and how they would listen, they would be present and attuned. So in other words, all the information on how to be kind and gentle and compassionate, it's all inside of us.
Yeah.
We have the capacity for it. It's just connecting with it and then using that capacity for ourselves.
Yeah. We need to forget not to be gentle and kind to ourselves. That's so well said. Oh my goodness. You're just a pool of knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I have to take off now, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think so many people need this, and I really appreciate the work that you do for people because you're healing so many people. All of us are broken in some way, but and we need to remember, like, though we feel broken inside, I guess I should reform this. We are not actually broken. We just got some things to work through, and that everybody is worthy of good things. So,
Very good. You,
yeah.
you saw right there, you noticed the harsh
I
belief,
did.
I'm broken, and made a choice. That's not how I'm going to look at myself. Because I
Yes.
don't, I don't think anybody's damaged goods or anybody's broken.
No, of course
We
not.
adapted to pain in the
Yeah.
best and only ways that were available to us. And that
Yeah.
wholeness, it still exists. It's available to all of us. It's just a matter of reconnecting
Yep.
to it.
Yep. And it's like that woman that keeps going back to her abuser. Why? Because she doesn't think she's worthy for anything else.
Yeah, and maybe
So,
she mistakes connection for conflict because that was what it
exactly.
looked like when she was growing up.
Yeah. Exactly. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Julian. It's been a pleasure having you on here. Hope maybe we could do a part two someday because this is a long conversation.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I really appreciate you coming on my show. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing for other people because they need it. Thank you for being a light to others.
Mm,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Thank you.